Hi, panel. Welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Pleasure to be here.
Back. Hey, Paul.
Hey, I know for a fact, sir, that you are not Garry Keller. So since we joined last week, Garry Keller, who used to be in that corner, got himself nominated as the Conservative candidate for Nipissing Timiskaming. And so I want everyone to welcome Jason Lietaer, who is the new Conservative on our panel. Jason is the president of Enterprise Canada, but don't send him complaints about your rental car. It's a different Enterprise Canada. Jason, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And yeah, I'm not Garry because I'm not, traipsing through North Bay and shaking hands and trying to get myself elected. So I think Gary's very foolish for putting his name on a ballot, but good for him and good for everybody that's putting their name on the ballot during this election campaign.
Everyone knows everyone, I assume? Yes? Very good. So there's an election. This is why I decided to have a panel. About a year ago, I thought, man, we're going to have an election. I'm going to need a panel. So now training wheels are off. Now we're doing it for real. And Jason, what do you make of the first few days of this campaign?
I think it's been an interesting one. We've got two parties vying for power. I think the NDP, we can talk all we want about them. They've had a tough last few months, but we've got two parties vying for power trying to fight for the frame of this campaign. And a couple of things have been noteworthy, I'd say. Number one, Poilievre's team trying to sort of recapture that magic of they won the affordability war over the last year and trying to recapture that magic and try to beat off and win a different argument, quite frankly, than the one that they've been arguing. And then we've got this guy who's been like prime minister for a couple of minutes who barely nobody knows. All people only have a little bit of knowledge about this guy. He's got a resume. They know his resume. They like his resume. But Carney's been had a good start from the polling perspective and winning some of the framing discussions. But I think it's been an uneven performance from him for the first couple of days. So whether or not their frame's going to come through with this sort of inexperienced, sort of uneven performance, but is I think the question for the next 30 or 40 days. And anybody that tells you that they know exactly what's going to happen hasn't been through an election campaign anymore or before. And this one's going to be an unpredictable one, and the stakes are incredibly high.
Marci, it feels like a bit of a framing war in the early days. Save Canada as the Liberal kind of proposition versus make a better Canada for a change on the Conservative side. How do you think they're doing in this framing battle?
I actually think the framing is pretty clear, whether you're watching this very closely or not. It is very clear that Mr. Carney is framing himself or trying to define himself in a number of respects. Certainly, he is trying to define himself as not only a manager of the economy, but a visionary on the economy and economic matters. I'm sure if you tried to word cloud what people had to say, and I agree with Jason, I mean, people don't really know who Carney is, but if you had to word cloud it right now, the economy would be the word that popped. And I think that's probably not ideal for the Conservatives at this early stage, but that is the early return for Carney in terms of anything that anybody knows or appreciates about him. The Liberals clearly have it's two frames. It is the economy, vision, second frame. It's save Canada, absolutely, but also be oppositional to Mr. Trump. And the Liberals feel very confident that if the ballot box question is, as we believe it may be, and again, I agree with Jason, campaign is going to shift everything a little bit on its head. If the ballot question is who is going to stand up against Trump and be stronger against Trump, that is where the Liberals believe they have the winning formula in Mr. Carney. It's very clear on the other side, on the Conservative side, that they need their focus to be on change. We all noted the bit of shift in language, Canada first, comma, for a change. Just anything, I guess, to have that word change be there and change be present. I agree that the Canadian public was hungering for change. They have now seen a change in Mr. Carney. Mr. Poilievre's strongest attack line is the fourth mandate piece. Who wants to elect a government for the fourth mandate? They're gonna keep hammering that, I have to assume. The For a Change edition, trying to ensure that it is a change ballot. And then their second frame is clearly domestic economic affordability issues, which they have prosecuted incredibly successfully for the last 18 to 24. I believe that is still very salient for the Conservatives to be running on as a narrative, and they have a more of an upper hand there. It's just not clear to me right now that that's actually going to be the primary ballot question on E-Day.
Allison, I'm a year younger than Mark Carney, and I've been trying to learn some new tricks as an old dog, and it's real hard. How do you think he's doing as a first-time campaigner?
I think that he's inherited a lot of, good fortune so far. If we're looking at the ballot box question as tariffs, sovereignty, geopolitical realignment, all of those pieces, I think that he walks into that probably more readily than any of his opponents. And I think that's largely because I think a lot of them still have a hangover from the last parliament, which was not a good or productive parliament. And it was very domestically focused. And so I think that if we're looking at that as the ballot box question, he already starts with an advantage just based on having not been part of that dysfunction already. And then also having that global experience, having that economic experience, and having those relationships globally. I think where he struggles is I think he needs a lot more media training. I think we saw him get a little bit impatient with the press early on in his campaign. And he can't have any more look inside yourself Rosemary moments. So that he has to get a lot more nimble, I think, as he exposes himself more to the media, because this lead is just his to lose. It's not going to get easier, and it's not going to get easier in Quebec either. So I think he's inherited a healthy lead. But to your point, Jason, a lot changes in a campaign. And I do see some of the undercurrents of Poilievre's messaging about needing to get our house in order and being frustrated with certain things about Canada. That's something that we heard from the Democratic government over and over again in the United States before we had Trump. Get your house in order, get your projects done, fix interprovincial trade, and have some national unity. And I do think that Poilievre was attuned to that. I just think that the messaging and the demeanor and the sort of lack of nimbleness to shift policy, I think there's still such an attachment to the old campaign and the old frame that isn't going to work now. They need to be much more nimble and much more attuned to the moment.
Jason, if the Liberals win, it'll be in large part because Carney has managed to convince enough voters that we've turned the page on a decade of Liberal government that a lot of people found extremely frustrating. And it's got to be maddening for the Conservatives to have spent, 3 years getting ready to run against Justin Trudeau, and then he's not there, and there's this new guy, who comes in with an alibi and plausible deniability, and it's got to be really frustrating for the Conservatives to try and scrape that shine off of him.
Look inside yourself, Paul. Do I look frustrated? No, I'm I'll say this. There's something in that is, and I think that's one of the reasons I think, Allison, you were just saying, it's hard to pivot. And I'll say this, there was such a dislike amongst both my party, but Canadians generally, for Mr. Trudeau, that it is hard to get off that sort of, that frustration with the guy. And, and this frustration that, you look and the band's still playing, right? You got Christian Freeland on guitar, Champagne on bass, Wilkinson back there on the drums, and, you pull in the new Sammy Hagar, I guess, and is he going to be any good? And so you change the lead singer. Is it any good? And I will say this, it's frustrating for sure, but that's past. And I think I'd encourage anybody in my party to think that's past. It's done. It's a new question. It's a new problem you're trying to solve. And I think the one thing that does frustrate me though, Paul, it's funny. I've got my prop here. I've got Mark Carney's book. I've been trying to read after what he believes in. And I'll say this, the truth about this guy is he's campaigning on a couple of things he doesn't believe in at all. And that kind of stuff, not only is he inexperienced, but campaigning on things you don't believe in at all, like getting rid of a consumer carbon tax, for example. Those are the kinds of things that actually show up during a campaign. You actually can't pretend. And authenticity really matters in politics. For example, I believe that Mark Carney wanted to get rid of the capital gains changes that Justin Trudeau and Christian Freeland brought in. I don't believe that Mark Carney wants to get rid of the consumer carbon tax. And I don't believe that Mark Carney wants an oil pipeline across Canada. I believe he might try to build one, but I don't believe he wants to do it. And I believe that, so those are the kinds of things that really actually frustrate conservatives, is when he's saying things he obviously doesn't believe in. Because guess what? You wrote a book and there's nothing about oil pipelines getting built in the next couple of years here. So that's the kind of thing that frustrates us. And I think that's the kind of thing that will actually start to come out over the campaign and be a little bit satisfying for conservatives to see Carney admit, for example, you have to go to Quebec and try to sell a pipeline, or have to go to Alberta and try to sell that he is trying to sell into Quebec. He doesn't believe it. And that's going to be a bit of where the discomfort comes in for Mr. Carney, I think.
That, incidentally, that look inside yourself thing, which is what he said to Rosemary Barton from the CBC when she asked a hard question. Or no, he asked it to Stephanie Levitz. Anyway, it's become a standard greeting among journalists in Ottawa. I ran into Steph Levitz from the Globe and Mail, who's another one of the reporters that he got short with. And I said, like you would say, hi, how are you doing? I said, look inside yourself, Steph. And she said, you're starting from a premise of negativity, Paul. So
yeah, point final, Paul. Point final as well.
Marci, do you have any? Does anything about the leader strike you as nervous? One of the pollsters said that the Liberal lead is built on sand and dry sticks. Is there anything that could threaten to blow that straw house away?
Yeah, I mean, if the foundation isn't strong, anything could blow it away. And I think this is going to be a campaign with more than a few surprises left in it. So any number of things could blow it away. I said in a media appearance yesterday, I'll say it here. I think the Liberals feel more confident than they were feeling several months ago. I feel more confident than I was feeling several months ago, for sure, because at least now it's a race, right? Like, we were looking down the barrel of this thing where it was not going to be a race. As Jason said off the top, this is now a race. Either the Liberals or the Conservatives could form government. I'm sorry to say to my friends in the other parties, I don't think they are going to be terribly relevant on this campaign. But it is a two-way race, which is really good and important for Canadians to have the opportunity to see a contrast of ideas, to see a contrast of leadership styles, to be able to vote and decide which of these visions is the right one for right now at a critical moment. Am I, concerned about the Liberal lead? Like I said on the other appearance, I personally never measure for drapes before we get much, much closer to the end. I think that every Liberal right now should feel confident that they are playing hard and need to play hard. Elbows up, to use the very overused phrase already in this campaign. But I think it would be at the Liberals' peril to believe that they have this in the bag. They need to believe that lead is that lead could be fleeting. That is the best mindset to be in. You have to believe that you could win it. You have to believe that you could lose it. Either way, you've got to go for it entirely. Liberals have a funny kryptonite. It is always the Liberal kryptonite, which is arrogance. And I would urge and caution all of my friends across the party listening to this that we should not forget that. We need to heed a feeling of caution mixed with optimism and ambition.
Okay, now we enter the portion of the discussion that I call exogenous events. There's what the parties are trying to do, and then there's just the craziest damn stuff that the world throws over the transom. By my count, we're up to about 4 exogenous events, which include Danielle Smith gave an interview to Breitbart. Mark Carney backed out of the larger of the 2 French debates in Quebec. There's this story in the Globe this morning about India meddling in the Conservative leadership race and Poilievre's security clearance. And I forget what the 4th one is, if anyone wants to remind me. Allison, what's your favorite exogenous event? And do you think, pick one and tell me whether it's going to make a difference?
Okay, I'll go with Quebec.
Yep.
This deciding not to be on the TVA debate, I don't think is going to make a difference. TVA might be broke, but Quebecor has a lot of money, and it's a really odd precedent to start asking parties to pay for debates. I think as long as Carney participates in the French consortium debate, it will be fine. I don't think that's going to make a difference. What's going to make a difference is Carney's approach to Quebec. So the man needs to keep working on his French. He needs to be very careful, showing that he understands Quebecers. It's not just the fluency, but he has to be careful around pipeline politics. He's got to be careful about proving to Quebecers that he's going to protect their industries, so aluminum, dairy. And I think that it's that connection. I know that he's starting with an advantage in that Poilievre has never managed to connect with Quebecers, but Blanchet can pick up the pieces pretty fast. And if I were him, I'd be getting ready for that French consortium debate every single day, because I'm sure that Poilievre and LeBlanc are just going to needle him. So that's, to me, that's the bigger thing. I think that he'll write out the TVA piece, personally.
Jason, this guy has the weakest French of a major party leader since Joe Clark. That's 50 years.
Yep.
But the TVA, the great people at TVA, by charging for this debate, they gave him a pretext for saying no. Once again, the guy, I mean, he's a hockey goalie, but he's pretty fast on his skates. He skates away from this one more time. Do you think it makes a difference? And then I ask you to address the Danielle Smith interview.
Let's deal with the easy one first. I think that I'm surprised that TVA folded so quickly and put out a cancellation notice like yesterday when this sort of broke up. I actually think a couple of more days worth of pressure. Like we saw Carney's inexperience, right? He's asked yesterday in French, "Are you going to be in this debate?" And he says, "Yeah, sure. Why not? Of course." I'll be there. You know, like me chicken to debate this idiot. Like that's the kind of vibe he gave off to the press gallery. And then later on, you know, his team like quietly, you know, like we will not be there. And like, let's face it too, there's a French debate, but there's a Quebec debate. The TVA debate is a Quebec debate. Like the other one is a national French debate. It's a, you know, it's a little bit different in terms of the vibe. And to your point, his French it's awful. Like, I mean, it's awful. He barely understands. He can barely converse. He has to sort of switch back and forth. And let's be honest, it's going to be a real, I think and this is the point I want to make about Carney. Carney, Chrétien, Harper, all the best politicians of my lifetime, Ford, for example, in Ontario, have all benefited from being under you know, expectations being low. They've benefited from low expectations. Expectations are sky high for Mark Carney. Most people have heard that this guy's like an A+ or at worst an A. That's what they've heard over the last little bit, or they've seen like pictures of this guy and he looks like this prime minister straight out of Central Casting. So they're like, oh, well, that looks like the Canadian prime minister over there that we're looking at. When most people see him, I think they're going to be a little bit disappointed, especially Quebecers, by the way, when he's fumbling and stumbling over his language. And so I think that's like he's actually, if I were the Liberals, the one thing I'd be worried about is that expectations are sky high. There's this idea that he's got a lead in the polls and that he's like Superman. And I actually think that like when most people see him, they're like, why so many uhs and ums? And he doesn't really seem to know what he's talking about that program, and his French sucks. So I think that's an issue for them. In terms of the Danielle Smith interview, and the resultant, number one, the issue of how close Poilievre appears to be Trump is an issue in this campaign. I'm not going to pretend it's not. It's actually one of the central issues of this campaign because it's the central liberal narrative. There's going to be 5, 6, 10 proof points that the Liberals are going to be looking for every single day on how to push that narrative. And let's listen, when the least popular man in Canada is the orange menace to the south, and he's a conservative, by the way, and he's attacking us. He's attacking our sovereignty. He's attacking all sorts of economic things. So anything that feeds into that, not helpful to the Poilievre cause, and he's going to have that yoke no matter who does interviews for the rest of the campaign. And I think it's obviously the biggest danger to the Conservative campaign is appearing and to not distance himself generally from the menace to the south. And I think I will say this though, I think by the end of the campaign, people are going to see that probably both of them have a plan to deal with Mr. Trump, and what we're going to see is whether or not Carney's sort of strength, quote unquote, holds up to scrutiny. And I think Poilievre's had a good couple of days, actually, the way he's personally performed. And I think people are going to come to the fact by the end of the campaign that he probably does have the strength the fortitude and the plan to deal with this guy. And I made the point, just to tie the two issues together, sorry to interrupt you, Paul, but like, if you can't handle the TVA debate, how in the world are you supposed to handle Donald Trump? Like, seriously, if your team is so scared, and like, we can pretend, but the Liberals can't pretend. They hid Carney for the last part of that leadership race because they didn't want him making a mistake. And now they're hiding him from a TVA debate. You want to send him to Washington to go negotiate with Trump, but he can't handle Yves-François Blanchet in a French debate. I know that they're different languages, but that's not the only issue here. And I think that's a little bit embarrassing for the Liberals.
Yeah. I thought of a clever rebuttal, but that's not my job. I'll let Marci try hers.
It's actually, sorry, just one quick point. It's actually not, it's not a rebuttal in the truest sense, but I think a point that's important to make. Actually, if we rewound the tape on this program, we talked about the TVA debate being one of these likely moments that could be a turning point in the campaign, because it has tended to create favor or opposition in a very real way for leaders. I remember Mr. O'Toole's appearance in the last one. It did not end so well for him following that debate. So I would say it's actually kind of unfortunate that it has turned out this way, where the TVA debate is now, it looks like, not going to proceed in any event. And there are these different factors, the pay to play, which I think is not a good look, period, for a debate, and was probably an unwise strategy on the part of the network. But I also agree it gave the Liberals an out, which was probably a nice out to be able to take. My point on this, though, is the consortium now has an opportunity to be better, for those debates to be better. There's only been all of this currency around the TVA debate because the French language debate has not lived up to the expectations that Canadians, or in many cases Quebecers, have about what they want to see from their leaders being tested. So I think there's now a vacuum that the consortium could fill, and would be nice to see in both languages that style. The reason why the TVA debate, for those who haven't watched it before, has been so successful is they call it face à face. It's that direct encounter between the leaders. And I, for one, would love to see that. I think the consortium could work some of that format in a way that is more resonant, and then let this be the end of the debate, so to speak. Let's actually have two really good debates. And we will see if Mr. Carney can perform or not in French, if he's truly tested in that French language debate. That will happen.
So I'll take that, because I actually have some history with debates. And I am so happy that the consortium has decided to go with single moderator in French and in English. For the last, especially on the English side, the last two elections, it was this ridiculous circus of 17 network anchors and a star reporter. Each one profiling to make their organization look better, and it was bad. Steve Paikin alone is better than any 7 moderators, just because he gets to make all of his decisions. And similarly, Patrice Roy on the French side, although they figured that out, I think, a little earlier than on the English side. So I think we are much likelier to have decent debates in 2 weeks than we would have been if they turned it into debate club the way they did the last couple of times. What are you looking forward to in the next several days? We're about a week away from Trump Tariff Day 2, so we've got a little bit of time to kill before he lowers the boom. What's going to matter in the next several days on the campaign trail? Allison?
I think the most basic one is just how much people can get out and meet with different communities, and have that face-to-face moment where people decide you're like a really great person and I've connected with you. And I think that always matters. The ground game is one huge thing. I'll say for the NDP, I'm looking forward to hearing a lot more about their policy vision. I thought it was a good move to have the housing announcement. The more that you can actually connect to what people want, and move away from the billionaire, rich people dialogue, which I don't think really works in Canada. We don't have a ton of billionaires. I don't think anyone feels rich right now. And so I do find it a bit of a polarizing message, and I kind of want to see them go back to some really meaningful, defensible policy, and then you can turn that into a slogan, but it has to be built on a vision that includes a lot of Canadians. So I'm anxious to hear more coming out of the NDP on that and what their vision is, which will be different than the Conservatives and the Liberals at this point.
Okay, Jason, what are you looking forward to in the next bit?
I think we're going to see. I think I'll say something for all the main parties because I think it's important. Like Poilievre, the momentum that he showed the last couple of days, big rally, sort of smiling, affable, trying to remind people that there's a vision, there's a plan, and some exciting stuff. Starting off with the big tax cut, and so on the affordability side. So I think momentum and the ground game. I think Allison, you mentioned, but it's pretty clear the first couple of days, the Conservative ground game is still pretty strong. I mean, 2,500 people turning away 1,000 people in North Toronto. That's the kind of thing that anybody dreams of. And you could see it in Poilievre's face. It sort of energizes him. It sort of reminded me of Trudeau back in 2015, where the crowd sort of energized him and you could see him actually pick up steam. So I'm looking for that for the Conservatives. The NDP, listen, find purchase somehow, right? And listen, as a Conservative, I'm cheering for these guys, right? Come on, you plucky NDP, let's get started here. Let's go. And I'll say Singh has been irrelevant for months and looks worse and worse. He looks like he's, burying his dog or, attending his grandmother's funeral every time I see him. And he's trying, but man, I got to tell you, it's a tough sled there. And, listen, Carney and the Liberals and Trudeau's, leaving has moved them to complete irrelevance. And I just, I hope for their sake, but obviously for a lot of different reasons that the NDP finds some purchase with something. They just haven't been able to do that. And TikToks aren't going to do it. They actually need to find an issue that resonates. And to your point, Allison, I just don't think that people are that mad at billionaires. Now, Carney's rich, but he's not that rich. And, we'll see. And for the Liberals, they're lucky in that they get, I think, people aren't paying attention, but the first little bit of this campaign will probably be a little bit slower and they'll do a crescendo after that April 2nd sort of time period till the end. And I think they've got to get him better. And, some of these mistakes will start to add up if people start watching and people start paying attention. But I'll be looking, they're picking up some star candidates for sure, because everybody's flocking back in. The old Anita and Ann, I quit, but no, I'm back. It looks good now. And I think that what's interesting and the chatter behind the scenes is this sort of Keith chattering, can Carney hold this together for 37 days? Because Paul, everybody, we've all been part of politics. It is really hard. Canadians have no idea how hard it is to front a campaign like this, whether it's a mayoral, a provincial, or a federal campaign. People have no idea the pressure that you're under every single day. We saw Carney crumble a little bit at various times or lose his patience. If he loses his patience, then that could be a house of cards for him.
Marci, what's the next week look like for you?
Two tracks very clearly, and we've touched on both. The first is Liberation Day on the 2nd of April. What I'll be watching for is can the government walk and chew gum at the same time? We are going to see the greatest opportunity for the Liberals in the campaign to have Carney look prime ministerial, for the team to look like that is the team that we want in place. I honestly couldn't, if I had to, and I've tried, determine who is going to be in Mr. Poilievre's cabinet in these key positions where they are going to be the primary interlocutors and negotiators with the United States. We can say what we want about some of the Trudeau team being tired. I hear it. I get it. At the same time, who are the Poilievre interlocutors beyond Mr. Poilievre himself? I mean, who can we name that we could imagine dealing with that administration in a way that is constructive for Canada? I think that is, I think what happens post April 2nd is going to help really paint the picture there in terms of who is not only the prime minister, but which is the ministry that we feel most confident about putting forward at this time with grave consequence potentially. So great opportunity for the Liberals to showcase that they can be the team, much like Doug Ford did in his campaign not so long ago. Also, high risk because we don't know exactly what the president is going to do. We don't know what schedule that those tariffs are going to come in on. If there is a lowering of the boom, as you say, Paul, in a very serious way right out of the gate on April 2, April 3, if what we are already in, the impacts that we are already feeling with respect to steel and aluminum, if that becomes more acute, more difficult for Canadian industry right in the middle of the campaign, forces the Liberals to be more focused on governing, less focused on campaign, that can have a real severe effect on a campaign. Let's be clear. I mean, the campaigns, as Jason said, they're very intense. They need to be well tended to, well fed, and it is very difficult to maintain your focus on two situations as consequential as that at the same time. The second piece is we talked about just now, the team. Just taking one step back, we see, I think Sean Fraser has announced his candidacy, his renewed candidacy this morning in Halifax.
Another Anand, the full Anand.
Another Anand.
Holy cow.
But so like the team is assemble the Avengers, I guess the team is coming back together, but we really do need to see some new faces. If Mr. Carney is presenting a changed team, it cannot be that he is the only change agent on that team. So there have been names that have been rumbling around. We thought maybe Christy Clark was going to take a stab at it in BC. She made clear yesterday that is not the case. We have heard a number of other names of profile and prominence being bandied about, a few of them starting to emerge. What is that future Carney cabinet consist of? Who are the others around him who we do not already know? And again, I think there's more of for the Liberals, there is more of an urgency to define that as well right now.
I wanted to cut it off, but Allison, it looked like you wanted to react when Marci said, what kind of team could Poilievre field? Do you have some names or some thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, okay, Jason, I'm going to just do your talking points for you here. I'm sorry, but I'm also a trade nerd, as you know. So I will say for the Conservatives, they wrote the major trade agreements that got through under the Liberals. They did the CPTPP, they did the CETA, they did a lot of the heavy lifting there. And having worked in Canada-US relations circles for a long time, I'll tell you there's nobody who works harder at that than Randy Hoback. And so I'm just going to stand up for him and his Substack, which writes prolifically about trade policy, whether he doesn't even get paid to do it. There are people. So, and at the same time, I would say with the Liberals, there were a lot of people who stuck their finger in Mr. Trump's eye and rubbed it in the first time and did things that were just deliberately irritating to that administration. So I actually think either way, there are going to be some decent people. You could put ankle biters in charge of the relationship. That wouldn't be great, but I definitely know from experience that the Conservatives are very good on trade too. So that is not my NDP hat. That is my trade nerd hat. So I will just put that out there.
Useful corrective. And also, I remember from the early days of the Harper government, being a cabinet minister makes you a cabinet minister. I remember Chuck Strahl getting up to answer a question in the House of Commons, and he was just old Chuck for those of us who've been following politics for a while. And suddenly he was Minister Strahl, and he didn't sound like a genius, but he sounded as good as any minister in his file had ever But it is a challenge for Canadians to make that sort of conceptual leap if they haven't been told who's coming.
I will say this. I honestly listen. I'll take Melissa Lantsman for everybody in that cabinet right now, and I will say I think team is actually a hurt for the Liberals. I know that they think well, Champagne and Anand and Fraser and all these kinds of things. I think the more discussion about that team, the more it gives Poilievre the ammunition to just say these are the people that messed up Canada for the last 9 years, and these are the people that you were so mad at 3 months ago. And I think it just reminds people that you're just changing the lead singer of the band. I do appreciate, Allison, what you said about the team down there and listen, I actually think both teams can do a reasonable job on this. But the point that you made is the point that I wanted to make, which is the Liberals have been really antagonistic against Trump, and I think are going to have to be more antagonistic in order to try to get reelected. And I will say that actions have consequences. I'm not saying they didn't doing things right or wrong, but the truth is we do know Ms. Freeland, for example. Mr. Trump hates Mr. Freeland. Ms. Freeland can hold it as a badge of honor, all of those kinds of things. It might help the Liberals get reelected to be hated by Trump. But I will say actions do have consequences. And one of the reasons why it's not the reason why we're being targeted with tariffs. That's their economic theory and their whatever. The reason why we're being so sort of personally targeted and they're being such jerks about it is because I think Mr. Trudeau, gave Mr. Trump and Mr. Trudeau did not get along. And I don't fault Mr. Trudeau for that, but it is the case that's happened, and it's one of the reasons why he's been so personally vindictive towards Canada.
Okay, I'm calling it. We're going to save all this good talk for next week. Thanks everyone for joining me, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.